What do you want? Do you want to grow in this profession? Do you want to grow as a leader? And at what level? Once they tell you that, then I think it's your responsibility as a leader to lay out reality for them. If you're going to be the one that's in charge of your life, then you're going to have to be the one that lives with the results of your life. And I think if you're not living a life for the betterment of other human beings, then you're living a shallow life.
Well, what's up, everyone? We want to welcome you back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy, here with my lovely, incredible host, Adrian Crawford.
What's happening, Bri? How are you?
I'm doing well. Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
I did have a good Thanksgiving. Very laid back. Ate a lot of food. That's normal. So it was very American doing that. But yeah, it was actually pretty peaceful. So what about you?
I had a great one. I watched so many movies. So I had a great time.
Huh?
I watched like 7 movies.
We both went to go see the new Hunger Games.
We did.
Very nice.
By nature, I had to go home and then watch every single other Hunger Games because I had the time and the luxury.
So yeah, definitely must go watch, must see. Thought it was great. Great origin story. So you gotta love that. Also, Bri, you were in the big city.
Big City Bri.
Big City Bri.
That's what they call me.
Oh my gosh, yeah, they really do. And Big City Bri was in New York City, so you take your annual New York City trip. So
I do. I take a solo trip to New York City every year.
Why do you do that?
I found that whenever I place myself in environments that are inspiring, and where I'm by myself to experience that, I make a lot of connections a lot quicker, and it just gives me space to come up out of the mundane and what I typically do, so that I can dream a little bit more about my life, and especially within the next year. And I'm able to do that a lot quicker, and with a lot more like confidence and ease if I'm by myself and I'm somewhere where I can intake inspiring information and be in environments that just make me think about the future.
Yep.
And for me, that's New York City. There's so much accessibility to art and music in ways that I don't typically get to experience. And that's what makes me be more present and just think about life in a more full way.
Very nice. What was your favorite part?
My favorite part is I went to a jazz club. I went to a little, it's not necessarily a speakeasy. It's built like one. It's called Smalls Jazz Club. It was so much fun. I find a lot of joy watching people get lost in something. Like that is something that inspires me. So while I'm not, an avid listener to jazz music, I do listen to it, but I'm not, super avid about it. Yeah. I love when you watch people, especially in jazz, they get so lost in the music, no matter what role they're playing. And I think that that's inspiring to see people, just like it's just a Tuesday night. They're just playing some music, but they're it's the best moment of their life, truly. That's how they feel about it every time. So that inspires me. And then I also got to see Starry Night by Van Gogh. Nice. I love Van Gogh. I'm super into art and fashion and all those kinds of things. So seeing art, especially that kind where it's almost 3D when you're looking at it, because you can see the thickness of the paint helps you see their fingerprints and how they crafted the painting, or I guess the strokes of the paintbrush, and that's super inspiring to me too.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Oh, Big City Bri. So everybody out there, listen, take in Bri's footsteps. Get your little solo trip if you can.
Yeah, solo trip.
Get yourself inspired. You know what I'm saying? Stay out of Miami or,
right. Choose your location wisely.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's New York City for me. It might be Idaho for you.
I know. So, somebody, you need to get away. Some people, you don't need to
Y'all need to go to the country.
100%. Well, sweet. Well, Bri, let's jump in today. What we got?
Well, today we are going to be talking about leadership maintenance.
Leadership maintenance. Okay.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about this topic and what made it come to your mind?
Yeah. It is something that I've been thinking a lot about because at 45, I've been thinking about longevity and how do you actually have longevity as a leader. I think when you're in your 20s, you're just trying to find your way and you're just trying to find any bit of leadership and trying to, just straight, grit and man, a lot of energy. In your 30s, you're still doing it, but a little bit more wisdom. And when you get in your 40s, you still have that grit and that kind of desire, but a lot more wisdom behind it now. And I've been thinking about, man, like with life and how, again, Lord willing, you can have a long, like life expectancy is going a little bit longer. And, the ability, I want to work as long as I can. I don't see myself like, hey, retiring and then just going in like playing golf or, sitting on a beach somewhere. I actually want to, I love to do what I do. And so how do you actually have longevity though in it? And so that's kind of been a little bit of what sparked that. And then I think what made me think about leadership maintenance is just actually, being an avid basketball guy, a lot of the conversation around the topic of load management and like player maintenance on their bodies kind of made me think about, man, they have that in professional sports, but we really don't think about that when it actually comes to us, professionally in leadership. So just started thinking about like, what does it really mean to have leadership, like to like have real good maintenance and really care for yourself as a leader?
Can you explain why you believe that this is important for especially high level leaders or to be a high level leader?
Yeah, because I think that as a high level leader, you're always on go. And so, we don't ever really stop and think, if you, they say LeBronjames spends about $1.5 million like on his body, like just taking care of his body. That's the estimate. So from, hyperbolic chambers, chefs, trainers, supplements, everything you can think of. And so you think about somebody, but it's an incredible investment. LeBron James making $1.5 million. The return on that investment is just astronomical, right? But we have one life, one body, one ability. And so as a leader, why we don't really ever think about actually how should we maintain ourselves? Is there just anything to do? But normally we don't. We just keep going, right? You just grind it out for 40 years. That's what it used to be. And then 65, you're like, all right, well, man, now I can retire from the game. Versus what if like you don't have to just do that. You can constantly just keep moving and pressing and building as you go through that process.
Can you share a little bit about the components that kind of make up this maintenance?
Yeah, well, I think two main components of this is I really think this idea of like vigilance, first of all. I think that, and I use that word vigilance because I think it's a word that actually like gets our attention. When you're vigilant about something, you're on watch, like you are paying attention to it. If you thought somebody's going to break into your house, you would be vigilantly watching like the doors and making sure every door is locked and, that you're armed, you're ready, all the stuff, right? The same thing I think when it comes to actually your development and your maintenance and you're taking care of yourself. And we'll get into what that means to take care of ourselves. But I think you have to be vigilant. I think you have to be paying attention. And I think most of the time in our professional lives, we don't actually pay attention. I just think we just go with the flow, right? Maybe we go to, at best, we'll go get our master's degree in something, to kind of get better at this, or maybe you'll go get a different degree. Maybe you'll go to some type of, school to get a certificate. Maybe you'll go to some leadership seminar. Maybe you'll listen to some podcasts. Maybe you'll get some type of training at your job. They'll have some type of professional development work there. But that's usually about it. But it's never really intentional. It's never intentional for the most part of how we're actually trying to like grow ourselves and develop ourselves. When I talk about maintenance, I'm not just talking about like recovery. I'm actually talking about actual development and how do you build, and also having really a process of building. Do you even have do you lay out how you want to see your growth pattern actually work? Do you have a plan of saying, hey, by maybe the age of 30, or 35, 40, I want to be here by now. Well, then how do you actually get there? See, you can learn a lot. Athletes do this. They plan, really good athletes plan, really good trainers plan out, hey, we're starting here, we're working to here, then we're going to work to here. But most of the time, if you think about it, we never stop to actually do that in our own development. And so that's one of the big things about being vigilant is that you're on watch, really paying attention to it. And there's some things we can get into later that I'll break down into like the two components of being vigilant. And the other part, I think, is this idea of personalized recovery. Actually, somebody used to work for me kind of coined that phrase, this idea of personalized recovery. And what that means is that I think there is a part of you as a leader that you do need to recover. Like, on your days off, are you actually being practical on your own personal recovery? Like, because if you're really working hard throughout the week, then how do you actually recharge? do you ever really think about how you recharge? Is there a plan for recharging? Or do you just kind of like, hey, I'm just off today. I may go out with my friends. I may do this. I may go work out. I may go watch the game. Or do you actually have a very clear plan? Because again, if you're looking at professional sports and athletes, those people, they have a very clear plan on what they do for their recovery. There's, professional athletes who work out after games now. They go to the cold tub. They're getting treatment. They are, the next day, what they're eating during season, what they're not. I mean, there's real clear things because why? They matter. Their body matters. Now, I know for some of you, you're like, well, listen, I'm not playing baseball, basketball, or football, or hockey, or something like that. So why does it matter? I'm like, well, because you're like the most valuable commodity is you, just like those players are. Now, they use their physical attributes to make their living. Well, you use your body. I mean, again, your mind. I mean, again, you have to stay sharp. You use maybe you are doing things that are physical, whatever, but you have to keep that sharp going. You got to keep yourself in shape. You got to make sure you're getting enough rest, sleep, all the things in order for you to perform at your best. But I think it's because sometimes we don't really see ourselves that way. We don't see ourselves competing, trying to be the very best that we can be. And we aren't working on the other stuff. That's what separates a lot of great athletes. Again, being a professional athlete myself, working in skill development and training, this is what separates really, really good athletes. The best ones are the ones who care about this stuff. The ones who are good, super talented, but just good, they just worked on the when they got on the court, they were ready, they went to practice, they trained. It was the players who actually did all the extra were the ones who separate themselves. And I think that's the same thing when it comes to leadership.
I have a few questions for sure based off of everything you said. One of the first things I thought about was if I were to be coaching you and I were to tell you to run until I tell you to stop, there's going to be an anxiousness to your pace the whole time. You'll be like, oh, I don't know. Am I running half a mile, 20 miles? Like, I don't know when this person's going. I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know when I'm done. And there's that's kind of how life feels. Like if you view life as a race. So do you have any insight on, I guess, how to create vision for yourself long term, especially if you don't have any confidence within that area, and also how to have, I guess, an awareness of your pace when you don't really know how long you have, or when you might be running slower, when you might not be running at all. Like you have no idea of that.
No, that's a very good question. I think, first of all, you have to understand what race you're actually running, first of all. I think that that is sometimes what gets a lot of people in trouble, because what we can tend to do is look at somebody else's race, and then we start to base our life based off of their race, right? I've got friends of mine who kind of, in their growth and development, really took off really fast in their leadership and their impact. And so sometimes I would watch them and I would get really frustrated because I'm like, man, how are they growing like that? And I'm not. And then I would try to keep up with their pace. Well, if you looked at it in more of a race, they may have been 100-meter runners, or they may have been a different style runner. And for me, it was maybe a little bit longer, maybe, an 800-meter race. You run different than if you're running a 50-yard or 100-yard dash. So I think, first of all, knowing what race you're running. And what I mean by that is understanding we talk a ton on here about self-awareness and resilience, trying to dig into finding your why. What's really that purpose statement? What drives you? What are you really trying to head in? That's the first thing, if you can find what's really the motivation pushing you. The second thing that you have to do is to understand seasons and time. Sometimes you're in a season of your life to where you're just learning. And so your pace, I think there's always times where we're running fast in certain areas. Maybe you're in your point of your life where you're just learning. So your pace is just to learn. It may not be you're climbing the corporate ladder, or you're moving up the ranks within your job or in the organization you lead, but maybe you're just but you're just consuming and learning a bunch of information because you're in a race, but your actual growth and actually your job to move up is maybe a little bit slower. So I think you have to understand what season and time and things you're in. And then what I think you have to do is also look at this. I was really challenged by this recently. I was actually sitting on a plane when we were flying to LA, and I sat next to Reverend Al Sharpton. Now, again, people have different perspectives.
What?
People have perspectives of Reverend Al Sharpton or whatever. But the one thing is this, regardless of your political views or whatever, is that he's been in certain circles. He's been, and he's made some impact in life. And so I asked him one question. I didn't want to bother, it's a 6 a.m. flight, so I'm trying to be respectful, but I had a million questions I would have asked him. But right when we landed in Atlanta, I asked him a question. I was like, hey, if you were, talking, me as a younger leader than you, what would you tell me is the most important thing you could, what's the biggest thing you could tell me and you thought about leadership? And he said this, he was like, where do you want to be 20, 30, 40 years from now? Then find mentors that are in that place. And again, it's not like it was revolutionary, but he actually told me a little bit about, he's like, yeah, like it was like, he just like name dropping casually. He's like, yeah, James Brown. And you're like, all right, something light. James,
let me call him up.
Like James Brown wanted me to be in, he wanted me to be more of a promoter, right? And he was like, well, I would have been more like Don King, the famous boxing promoter, if I did that. He's like, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be a lot more like, he was like, I wanted to be more in helping people and helping the cause of Black people. So I want to be a little bit more like Jesse Jackson. So he's like, that's who he got as his mentor. He had the ability to do that. My point in saying that, he knew where he wanted to go. And then he got mentors and people to help train him within where he wanted to go. I would say the same thing. You got to look at where do you want to be 20, 30, 40 years from now. And maybe you don't know that destination. Maybe you only know 5 years from now. But whatever that is, then can you find somebody to help you? Can you start mapping out your course? What would it take for you in 5 years to be, a vice president? What would it take for you in 5 years to be, a manager or director? What would it take for you in 5 years to, whatever that role would be? And then work your way backwards. So I think those are just the little things, I think, to kind of like shorten the distance, because you're right. Life ends up being so crazy to where we just go and we don't ever stop. And then we wake up at 45, you wake up at 50 and you're like, what did I really do? Because we just let life happen. It's like somebody telling you, hey, just go run. All right, here's work, go run. And I think you got to stop and be intentional about what you're trying to do.
Mm. The other question that I was going to ask you in kind of a similar vein with the parallel of athletics, in life, how do you know when you are injured versus when you are sore? And how do you know when you're at the point where it's like, oh, I'm sore enough that if I push myself, I'm going to get injured? Because I feel like we can all tell that from a body awareness standpoint for the most part. Mm-hmm. But once you start talking about things that feel a little bit more conceptual, like professional development and emotions, what are some guiding principles for that?
Well, I think you still can listen, I think, a little bit to your body. That's one thing now that I'm becoming a lot more aware of, is kind of like, where do I feel things kind of in my body? Like, I can tell it's really weird now at this point to where if I'm doing something that maybe I shouldn't be doing, I shouldn't be down that road working on that, diving into something, thinking about that or whatever, I actually start to feel it physically in my body. Before, I think I did before, I just wasn't paying attention because it was like, what you're saying, you're like, oh, how do I, like, I could tell I'm physically working out.
But there's also like a disconnection from it until you're forced to face it.
Yes.
And so looking back on your life, what would you have done differently? Because you're someone who's fairly aware, but it was like you were at the point where you could kind of
do it. Yep.
Just keep going anyways.
Yep.
How do you do that preventatively?
I would say this. That's a great point. I didn't feel it. I would say, well, maybe I did, but I don't think I felt it. I just think I had a high capacity to just run and carry a lot. What I would say is, like I would say now, is understanding what you're responsible for, both in like what you have to like physically get done. Like, I've got a proposal to do. I'm in charge of this client, this account. I've got to whatever. I'm leading these 20 people who my direct reports, whatever. I think that's your responsibility there. But then also the emotional responsibility. What I did a really bad job of is taking on the responsibility emotionally of people I led, meaning that I was more codependent. I didn't know where I ended and the next person began. So when they were having a problem, man, I would be very much so too involved, or I would carry that weight too much, because sometimes I would think, well, this is on me. Okay, I'm leading them. You would hear these statements about leadership, like everything rises and falls on leadership. I believe that. what that means is that doesn't mean that if you got people within your organization who aren't doing what they need to do, or they've got some other troubles, maybe they haven't been working the way they need to work. That doesn't mean you haven't set the right culture. That may mean that they're lazy. That may mean they've decided to do other stuff outside of work. I took on way too many personal responsibility. And because of like, I really do care for people, I would carry that. And I think over time, my body just, it would be like if you were, like you said earlier, running and I was totally fine till I wasn't fine. And then my body started telling me, okay, you can't do this enough. And again, I have a high capacity to carry things. And so what I would have done differently is I would have do what I'm doing now. Be very specific at what I'm focusing on. Be very clear on what I'm responsible for. And know where I'm going to draw my lines and my boundaries when it comes to actual emotionally with people. Not so much the work, but the emotional boundaries is where I would draw the line and do that way better.
Mm-hmm. And I think another perspective too is that when you say because you are the CEO and founder
Yes.
of a few organizations, it's also what is that for the organization as a whole as well.
Yep.
And I think that most people's perspective of companies as a whole are that they don't care about people. And so what would be your perspective on that? Like, what's the difference between, as a company, like, this is my priority and this is what we're trying to do, and like, get in where you fit in, or and then also the other side where people aren't considerate of their employees.
I think that I think the bigger you grow, I think the healthy thing to do is to, as a leader, is to actually know, like, here's your, like, these are people directly report to me, and how do I care for them, and how do I make sure they're caring for other people, and we have systems that are downstream to make sure people are cared for. What I am talking about is, I'm not talking about if somebody has an illness or a sickness and, man, we come around because they're friends. Hopefully the people you work with, that's how I believe. I believe if you're working close with people, there should be a level of relationship there. I'm not talking about something like that. I'm talking about where all of a sudden people could be going through some things emotionally. And what I would do, because I care so much for them, I could at times, take time out of my day to stop, even though we needed work to get done. And I would do that. Now, I'm not just talking about like, hey, even once a week. Sometimes this would go on for some people like multiple times, a day. I'm like, hey, all right, well, let's work through it. Let's da-da-da. And I thought that was a caring thing. What I realized was that I was trying to be the superhero of their story. And what I wasn't allowing them to do is to carry the weight of their stuff that they're walking through, because sometimes you got to feel that. And I'm not saying they did anything wrong. Some of the stuff was they were working through stuff that had just happened to them that was stuff that they didn't want. It was not something they like caused. They were just walking through it. But even those things, you have to be able to walk through that, and you have to know how to like support, but people still have to feel the weight, because what I was doing was not allowing people the opportunity to grow. I was kind of hindering their growth sometimes. And so what I was doing is carrying that weight, another person's weight, that weight. Then I've got my own family weight, my kids' weight, my own personal stuff. And that stuff becomes real crushing. So I think in an organization, you should care. But I also think, too, it's this both and thing. I think an organization needs to be better about caring. But I also think when people show up, they shouldn't expect that either. I think both sides. I think if both sides come to the table and say, what can I give versus what are you going to give me? Then I think that's when you have a healthy organization, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think breaking down into the nuances of it, because I think we want to help develop leaders to be able to care for people and themselves effectively. Mm-hmm. When you think about like the conversations that you had there, I feel like there are nuances, because there's like, does that always mean you don't have that conversation, or does it mean that in that conversation you're present in a different way? It's like whenever I'm in that conversation, I'm aware that it isn't my job to fix this, and this time I'm just going to listen. Or it's one of those times where it's like, hey, I can't talk about this right now. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think you're right when there is that part. I think with anybody, like, you can't fix people. You can give them advice. You can point them down certain directions. You can be a listening ear. Sometimes they have an off perspective. You can give them some guidance and wisdom, but people have to want to get better. And I think that was the other part. I wanted people to be better. That probably was the biggest thing for me. The gift is that I can see who you should be and want that for you. Sometimes I would want that more than people want it for themselves. And that's where it was unhealthy for me. And that is where it would be this thing. And so you're right. It is very nuanced. I think it's about, sometimes there's people where, you know what, they really need your help, and they're willing to listen, and you can help move them down the pathway. And then there's sometimes where you're like, man, you got to be able to know in that moment, yeah, they need to actually wrestle with this, like, matter of fact, they don't really need to talk about it. They just need to kind of struggle with it a little bit. I think we really have a problem with today, with letting people struggle, and even struggle for things that they didn't cause. I think that's important. Like I can tell you that there's so many things that I'm better at, have wisdom, and I'm able to help other people now because I wrestle with stuff that was caused, like that happened to me that I didn't cause. But by wrestling with them and going through them, and on the other side learning and still having a good heart and good perspective, not letting it taint me or make me bitter, I'm actually better because of it. But I had to wrestle with that. And I think so many times we don't let people wrestle with things, especially when we know it's not their fault. We will say, well, okay, it's not them, so let's carry their burden with them. No, sometimes, they need to carry that burden, because you know what? Even in that bad situation, it can actually, turn into something, good. As a friend of mine, Tim Timberlake, says, it's like the idea that sometimes like the blistering can actually become a blessing. Sometimes you got to let it happen.
Staying in kind of the vein of organizations and companies, and then we'll go back to a more individual standpoint.
Yep.
How do you think that you can build an organization that's mission and goal driven? Like it's clear, like this is the race we're running, and this is the milestones we're trying to hit, but it also has proper training and proper recovery in place so that they can have long lasting impact? Yeah,
I think it's all about, you try your best to have like some organizational kind of like parameters in. But it has to, sometimes as well, you have to know the people who are working with you, and you have to have room within that organization to make it a little bit more personalized too. You may have a group of people where, they're not really struggling with the, typically they might maybe not struggle. If they're like a Gen X boomer, they're not struggling with like work, like time, right? They have been so used to doing that it was usually out of balance. But you may be working with, again, I know I'm putting just a blanket statement on like millennials, Gen Z, to where they actually need to, part of their growth, they need more weight on the bar. And so you need to be able to have a room to give them, if they want to grow, to give them more opportunity to do that. I think that's probably the most important thing, I think, as a leader, when you're working with somebody, is asking them, what do you want? Like, what do you want? Do you want to grow in this profession? Do you want to grow as a leader? And at what level? Once they tell you that, then I think it's your responsibility as a leader to lay out reality for them. So if you're working in a finance, let's say you're working in New York City, since you were just there, and you're working in finance, to say that you want to move up the ladder, to put yourself in a senior level position by working 30 to 40 hours a week, there's no shot that's happening. And you have to tell them that. And so now they have to make a choice of what do they want to do. Oh, no, if you want to move up, then this is what this is going to look like your first couple of years. You're pretty much going to be working 50, 60, 70 hours, not a lot of breaks. You're going to be doing probably 10, 15 times a year. You're going to be doing multiple nights, all-nighters up here. That's the job. Do you want that right now? And they may say, no, I don't. That's okay. And I don't think the company's wrong for saying that either, if that's what they're communicating. And I know today everyone says, well, that's not healthy. I'm like, that's fine. I just think what's not okay is when you don't lay that out. And then people didn't have a choice for what they want to do. Now, should they be fired for it? No. But what if somebody says, man, I just want to work my 40 hours? Okay, well then understand what you're going to get, your level of growth, your level of face time, exposure. It may not happen, and your trajectory will be slower. So I think that's one of the greatest ways an organization to do it, is to ask somebody, where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? And if they give you, they say, I want to be this, and they say, okay, you lay out reality to them. If they give you permission, I want you to help me get there, then that's when you push them to the level they're willing to be pushed. I just think the problem sometimes in corporate is that leaders assume everybody wants to like be like them. And that's what's messing up a lot of leaders now, because they're all like, this generation doesn't work hard. It's like, no, they're just actually don't want what you wanted. And that's not wrong for them. But also but they also have to understand that then you're not going to get maybe that promotion, that money at that level you thought you would get. And so that's kind of like, that's reality. And so I think that's one of the biggest things you can actually do.
What do you think is the long-term cost of consistently pursuing a life majority of recovery?
Of pursuing a life that's all you're doing is kind of just trying to get to recovery.
Yeah, and maybe people don't realize they're doing it,
Yeah.
but it's kind of the pursuit of remaining comfortable.
Yep. I actually think people who their pursuit is just to be comfortable, because I know that's ultimately what you're getting to with this life of, when we talk of recovery, it's meaning like, man, how do I get
I'm in my healing era.
Yes. God, I hate that word. Or I hate the whole statement. But I think that, and I hate that statement, that's FYI, is because I think it's so abused for people who actually do need to get better and get healed, that now people are just using that because
people who are in their healing era do in fact not state that they're in their healing era.
That's it. You're 100% right. When you're telling me I'm in my healing era, then that means right now you don't need to be in a healing era.
Yeah, if you're in your healing era, I can tell by the bruises.
Yes. Most people
when I look at you.
And most people who are in a healing era don't want to be in one. They're trying to get out of it.
Right.
I would say that most people who are trying to live, and when we talk about this idea of like recovery and just, man, I'm just trying to get to, 4-hour work week or whatever, just trying to minimize your work, whatever. I don't think there's anything, I just think you're going to be limited as a human. I just think you only grow in discomfort. Like, I think you grow the most in discomfort. And so it's not about like climbing the corporate ladder. It's not about becoming a leader in this nonprofit. I just think it's about you becoming a better human being. And I think that when you just settle for comfort, you're going to limit that, because the human nature, regardless of what people say, regardless of this, in the new era we're living in, everyone thinks we're naturally these like good, we're going to do the best and think what's best for individuals. No, we don't. We end up becoming people who are just more selfish. That's part of the issue. We just become more selfish because that's all we're trying to do. Think about even those who've made their money, and that's what's funny to me, who've climbed the corporate ladder, or they've started a company and they've made all this money, and now they're like the movers and shakers. It's really interesting how they try to go to comfort. They then try to put laws and rules in for the next generation that's coming up who did the same thing they did. Because why? Everybody's fighting for comfort. And when you start fighting for comfort, what you're going to do is try to exploit and expose people to get what you want. It becomes a very selfish way to live, and I think it just limits the growth of humanity.
I have a question for the other side, but you mentioned the 4-hour work week, and I'm glad you brought this up because I wanted to ask you, what is your opinion? That was a major book. It's a big deal whenever it came out. I haven't read it personally, but I've heard of the concept. What is your opinion on?
I've actually read the book, and I like Tim Ferriss a lot, actually. His Tools of the Titan book, phenomenal, just great resources. So podcast is great. When I say that, I don't say that as a knock toward Tim. I say that as what they misunderstood what these concepts were. What he ultimately was saying is, look, you don't have to, the stuff that he was trying, when you read the book, stuff that people just said you just had to do, he was like, why? We can automate that. And so he was ultimately saying, if you want to live this type of life to where, man, maybe I want to live remote, I want to travel more, I want to do this. Okay, you can build a business and do that and eventually automate it and check in and do all those things like that. Now, Again, I think the problem, it's a lot easier said than done. I think there's a high level skill set that Tim has. He's a very bright thinker. So I think, if you're just, Joe Smo out there trying to, I'm automating everything, it's not going to, I don't care. I don't care. It's just not going to go well. But I think sometimes we don't take that in consideration. And so I think people will take that as like gospel, and this is what it's going to work for everybody. So I actually liked the book. I liked the principles. There was actually things when I read the book, I actually learned from the book a ton. And just, it made me think a lot about being more and more disruptive. So it sparked a lot of thought. So I owe a lot to Tim for that. I just think people are just looking for shortcuts to try to make a bunch of money, or try to make as much as they can with the least amount of work and things in there. And what they'll do is read one story or two or three, and then they'll think that. But what about the other? How many people do you know who've tried, oh man, hey, you need to sign up for this multi-level marketing thing, or do this, that are still they've done like 10 different things this way. I just think that at the end of the day, why do you want to work a 4-hour work week? That's the biggest question I'm going to ask. Why? Just like, why? You're like, okay, I want to travel. Okay, cool. Well, do you know what comes with that? Like, if you're just about traveling, there are going to be limited relationships you have because you're not planting your feet anywhere to actually do life with people. If you're just, I'm using travel as something. Mm-hmm. Man, for you, if it's just about getting and consuming, then you're never going to grow, because you're always going to be about what can I consume and make my life comfortable, because you think you're owed that. Again, it goes back to, I think when people were looking at it, if you're doing it just for the betterment only of your life and not the life of others, it's a difference. You're like, man, I'm trying to do this so I can spend way more time at home, because I want to go to all my kids' games. I want to coach their teams, so I want to automate. Dude, I think that's phenomenal. Do that. But if it's just for you to like freaking be able to work remote in Ibiza, I think it's just stupid. Because again, I just think it limits your potential and your growth as a person.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like what you said about why. I know we always like bash on people who like to travel here. For the record, we do like to travel. But I like what you said though, because most of the times, let's say somebody is like, oh, I want to be able to travel, and then you ask the question why. Yep. It's like, oh, well, I want to have like a global perspective, and you're like, yes. Okay, well, why? Like, is it for your own moralism, your own like what? I feel like I always look for, when that question, the why question is answered, is how many whys does it take this person to get to where it impacts somebody beyond themselves?
Yes, that's it. Because I just believe a life that's shallow is a life that doesn't impact others. And that's just my worldview. That's my belief. And that's the thing I will trumpet. I think if you're not living a life for the betterment of other human beings, then you're living a shallow life. And so that's why, ask yourself why. Do it. I mean, again, I am all about, man, do whatever you want to do. Also understand what you're giving up. That's the thing. I think today, Bri, we talk about this a lot. People don't count the cost for what they want. They want to work a 4-hour work week, make $500,000, have all the greatest friendships and relationships, have a great healthy family, great marriage, be able to do all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's freaking awesome. You know what? And I wish there was like, freaking elves and trees with like chocolate chip cookies, but they're not. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they don't exist. So you got to live in reality. And it's okay. I respect any person. I mean, there's a few people I know that's like, yeah, they're happy with their job, and they actually are talented enough to take bigger steps. But they're like, in this part of my life, I'm good, because I want to be around. Their friendships matter to them. They don't even have kids yet. They're like, man, my community matters to me. I have people do that. They're like, man, somebody I know well who is a part of our church here that had an opportunity to get their dream job, but they actually turned it down because they felt, I had no idea.
They turned it down.
Turned it down.
They didn't just turn it down.
They turned it down. That's how hype it was. Is that because they felt their time and season of being here within this biblical community wasn't done yet. And that I had no idea was happening. All of a sudden, they just told me like 3 weeks later. And I was like, man, that's amazing. No one coerced them. No one knew they were doing it. They just felt this leaning to do that. To me, but then they dealt with the consequence. Oh man, dream job, maybe it comes again, maybe it doesn't. Financially would have been a big bump up. So, but they were still willing to know, by staying here, I'm trading maybe financial growth and opportunity for relational things. And for them, that meant more to them. That counts more to them than the money in the bank account. And I think that's totally fine. You know what I'm saying? I think that's where people have to start being honest about what they're trying to do and what matters, because everything can't matter to you.
Mm. I think this is a good segue to my next question, which really is along the lines of counting the cost, because as a society, we have this major pursuit towards physical, emotional, and mental health. Mm-hmm. And health is usually synonymous to like consistent, or like in a way that is comfortable, it seems. Yep. But anytime you want to do something, it always comes with a cost. So it seems like, what I'm asking, is there really a way to prevent all forms of breakdown, physically, emotionally, mentally? Because it seems like a form of breakdown, major or minor, is just part of the cost of whatever it is that you decide to do. And I would love if you could bring up Lincoln, the movie that you love, and kind of tie it into your response.
Yeah. I think, there are just certain things that people may be called to that you can't prevent the impact a little bit. I mean, think about whenever you watch a president in the United States, somebody go into office, they age. There's no way around it. I mean, Barack Obama went in, and Barack Obama was young. I mean, the hair's dark. I mean, my man was looking young and crispy. After 8 years, Barack had my hair. He had the blend, the gray black blend. Barack had that, like, yo, dog, your boy's like, yo, I need a drink. He need a drink every time I would see him, because here's why. Because when you listen to his, like, when listening to his autobiography, man, like, he talked about, like, every morning he gets a file of all of the potential, like, terrorist hotspots, big problems in the world. Every morning you were reading, like, oh, I got to make a decision on, should I allow the military to go do this? Should we go investigate this? Hey, there's potential 25, terrorists that are, like, unaccounted for in our country. What should we do about that? What happens if a bomb goes off? I mean, like, that's just, I mean, you're waking up. I mean, I get frustrated sometimes. My kids are asking me questions in the morning before like 7. My man's waking up to world problems, right? That's going to age you. And I thought about this week again, watching the movie Lincoln. I love the movie because I think Steven Spielberg does a phenomenal job of actually bringing you into the cost of leadership, the cost of, how do you get something done? Something that was so horrible as slavery, but then watching Abraham Lincoln have to honestly leverage the law and the Constitution, where some people would say he overstretched. He kind of did, as a president, he kind of went a little bit too far with his power in order to get rid of it, in order to see the 13th Amendment pass. But I will never forget, it was at near the end of it, and someone, I can't remember, it was another, I think it was somebody who was in the movie, and they looked at him and they said, man, you've aged 10 years in this 1 year. And it's true, because if you think about it, he's trying to hold this experiment of the United States together. He's dealing with the atrocity of slavery. He's dealing with the fact of, like, man, hundreds of thousands of people, young people, were dying because of this war. He was dealing with the fact that he lived with a wife who, I mean, really was like, I mean, she was crazy. Was living with the fact that he lost his first son, living with the fact of his own personal depression. Like, there's certain things that, man, you can't, and I can attest to that. There were some things I could have done better. I could have been better at kind of my health. I could have done better at what I was saying earlier about carrying certain emotional burdens. But I look at the things I've started over the last, probably 10 to 15 years. And if you look back on it, it really has. Parts of it has aged me. And I think there's some things I could have done better that maybe wouldn't have aged me as fast, but it still would have aged me. just because of a lot of the work that I'm in, it's dealing with human beings. And unfortunately had to deal with some horrific tragedies and walking people through those things. Having to build 2 different businesses in 2 down markets. Those things will stress you out. Being on the hook for buildings during COVID, and you have no idea about government, anything, money, whatever, like the stress of that. I just think some of those things you can't get past. But I do think there's ways to be as good as you possibly can, but also understanding it's going to age you. And again, I think it all just depends on the calling and the job and what you're working on.
In the beginning, you mentioned that, who was it again? The 1.5 million.
LeBron.
Investing 1.5 million.
LeBronjames.
If you had $1.5 million to invest in your training and your recovery for this race in your life, knowing the end goal for you, what would you invest it in?
Great question. I for sure would. I would definitely, some of them I'm already doing. I would definitely invest in more of in today's world, personalized like medicine. I think that's a new wave that's out. So I actually have somebody that actually kind of helps oversee. Shout out to my man, Dr. Farr, if he's listening. He does a phenomenal job, and he's somebody who kind of where he literally has, because I've been walking through some of this health stuff, he's been on that journey with me. And so he's a guy who's constantly looking at it, looking at my blood work, looking at diet, looking at all the stuff. And he's been really, really helpful. So I would definitely for sure, something like that. For me now, again, if you're talking about that all types of crazy amounts of money, I definitely would hire someone to freaking cook for me for sure. For sure. I mean, you're.
Can I talk about that being one of the biggest burdens of life?
Oh man,
is every day waking up, I have to literally figure out what I'm going to eat multiple times a day today.
Listen, then
when you have kids, not only for me but my children,
for your children too. And so definitely, I would for sure do that. Now let's get into the actual leadership part. I would definitely right now, I would look to, if I had money wasn't an object, I probably would look to hire someone who I really respect in this area. Whether if it was somebody like a adamgrant, simonsinek, I'm trying to think of somebody else. Probably garyvee would be another guy. But if I could spend time with them, saying, hey, man, can I spend with you once a week? And just whatever problems I'm dealing with, working with, let them invest. Let's look at this. I think there's probably some other people. I would for sure spend the money all day. All day, if I could get in rooms, that's probably what I spend most of my money on in a leadership development standpoint. If I could get in a room with guys and girls who I thought were high level and I could just learn from them, I could just shadow them. I would go do that. I would spend once a month, I would take 3 or 4 days to go, who has a great culture? Let me go shadow them for 3 or 4 days. And they let me have all access. That would be probably the biggest investment I would make into that. I think from an actual leadership development standpoint, I probably would do something like that. And I think another thing I would do for sure in my recovery, for me, I would take my friends and their families, and we would go somewhere for 2 weeks together, where everybody has their own space, room, whatever, but we could come together when we wanted to. We would do that. For me, that is very much so brings me life, is to do stuff like that. So I would definitely do something like that. What about you?
I think that a personal chef, easy. Yeah. Oh my gosh, easy. That one's up there. I would probably plan quarterly, 3-day weekends where it was kind of my solo trip, but it's quarterly.
Okay.
And the hope would be that it could be one of those I don't have my phone. They could be, because New York is everything's getting all lumped into one.
Yep.
So if I could do it more quarterly, I would have somewhere it was I don't have access to pretty much anything, and I'm just there figuring out what comes to mind. I forget what leader does that. Do you remember? I can't remember who.
There is somebody I know. I can't remember who it is. Yeah.
But they go somewhere for like a week, and they cut out all access.
Yep.
And it's one of those, like, if you need me, you have to fly to where I am and come and get me.
Yep.
Because it's like, it's not until like the third day where they really get going.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely have moments like that. I like what you said about friends. Like, I would want to have a time period where at least once a year where it's like, oh, I can actually pay to have all my friends come together and do this thing. I would for sure I'm like super into like health, and especially because I'm young, I feel like I have a bigger opportunity to kind of get ahead of habits. So outside of food, I would probably have way too many memberships. I would make sure I had like cold plunge, sauna, somatic therapy. I would have like massages, just things like that where it's like, and if you have money, you can actually pay for better healthcare.
Yes.
So healthcare would be the biggest thing. Like right now, I'm starting to get scans monthly, or not monthly, annually. I'm starting to like have my blood work done, even though there's not a problem yet. It's like I want to get ahead of what that is. I think that's everything that crosses my mind right now.
Good.
Definitely experiences though. I would try to quarterly have experiences where I was getting to do something different.
Yep. I think that's great.
Well, I have something fun.
Oh, let's do it.
I have a question from the people.
From the people, let's do it.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but
all right.
Think about it. So,
let's do it.
Does having such a vital role in your community ever make you feel stuck?
Having a vital role in your community that can make you be stuck. I say no, and here's why for me. Because I think that I actually really enjoy it. And I also know that though it would be hard to go do something different, I also know that if I were in a place longer than I needed to be in a place, I would become a hindrance to that community. And so if I love it, even though I know it would be hard, I would try my best, I think, to let it go and to move on to something different. But right now, I would say for me, it doesn't make me feel, I would say this, there's probably moments where, you feel like, man, like everybody, people depend on me, they do this, and this. But in the end, I think that I just really like what I do, and I like the community I'm in, and I like being a big part. I like helping. And then I think in due time, if it was time for me to take a different role within that community or to move somewhere completely different, then hopefully I would have the ability to do that, because I think that if you stay somewhere longer than you need to, it ends up becoming detrimental for you and detrimental for the community as well.
Can I say that I think, and I could be off, but I think also underlying to this question, there's a question of like, how do you interpret and internalize commitment? Because I think that, especially from the younger generation, there's almost this fear of commitment because there is a fear of expectation. Yeah. It's like you have this role in your community, so you're expected to meet these standards. You're expected to fulfill this role, and that can be pretty, like, scary for those that are younger.
But again, I think I think you have to ask yourself this question. And I was like, who do you want to become? Like, do you want to be like just a person that, that some people kind of knew, but like really didn't impact anyone? Never, kind of some of your same selfish behaviors, you still have them when you're 80 years old. Like, I don't, if that's what you want, then don't commit. Don't be somewhere. But I actually think that being somewhere makes you realize who you are. It makes you realize where you need to change. But it also, man, it encourages you too. Let me tell you this, being planted somewhere, those people know you. And those people become some of your biggest fans. They'll be some of the biggest people to help pull out of you, oh, no, this is who you are. Versus going always into some new community and from this thing to that thing. I just think that people don't want to stay committed anymore, because it is like, and I see this a lot, and you and I are both in this world. I see this in a church world all the time, and it honestly it breaks my heart, and it's infuriating too, because my Bible belief is that God's all-knowing, right? He knows everything. If he's an all-knowing God, who I believe is a good God, I believe he created the heavens and the earth and everything that's in it, that he can't move you when it's your time to go. Like, I've been doing this for a while. I very rarely, or if I've ever heard someone say, oh man, dude, I move way too slow. I should have, that relationship, oh gosh, I was like, man, I was just too slow on that. I missed my moment. It's never that. It's always like, I went too fast. I was impatient. It's never I went too slow. And what I think people do is that it's a lack of trust and faith when you won't commit. Because what you're saying is, I know better. I have to control it. No one else is going to control this. And let me tell you this, when you live that way, if you're going to be the one that's in charge of your life, then you're going to have to be the one that lives with the results of your life. And I'm saying that and I mean that in the kindest way I can say this, but like, sometimes people just have to sit down, settle, and just get to work. There's just no other way around it. And you know what? And man, when it's your time to go, man, people will let you know. I mean, I can tell you this. This is the place where we're at. It is a hub for turning people, developing them and sending them to the world. I have the greatest joy of doing that, of getting people ready, prepared. Man, where are you called to go? What's next for you? Like, I know that's part of the call of my life. But I can tell you, it's always the people that are trying to always get somewhere who never develop, who never grow, because they have their eyes on something else instead of their 10 toes down, their eyes on where they're at right now. And they just end up being very immature, limited human beings. And so, and that's kind of where they land. And let me tell you this, and I've seen people in their 60s still limited and immature because they're always talking about the next thing. Oh man, it's right around the corner. Oh man, if I would have did this. Oh, I'm being here, man, if I would have left. Yeah, okay, you could have, or you would have, but maybe not. Maybe you're not as good as you think. Maybe being here is incredible for you. Maybe being somewhere else is incredible for you. But whatever that place is, again, like our boy JT always says, like JT is very simplistic. JT works for us. He is phenomenal. And he always says this. He's like, man, everybody's always trying to figure out what's next. He's like, what's next is, what are you doing? What literally is in front of you? Do that. And it's so simplistic, but it's true. Whatever's in front of you, whatever opportunity you have, do that. And if another opportunity presents itself within some of those same veins, then what matters to you the most, if that lines up, go do it. If it doesn't, stay locked in.
You said it.
Sweet. All right, guys. Well, hey, I also want to encourage you. We're going to constantly be talking on this idea. We'll be diving more into, more about maintenance, more about what does it look like, questions you can ask yourself. What are ways that you can actually start to evaluate your life through this process? And so, man, we want you to continue to stay connected, be in our New Rules community. If you have questions, you have thoughts, make sure you DM us, you follow us at Write New Rules. And until next time, you keep doing it. Keep writing New Rules.